There's a strange thing that happens after 50. You'd think by now we'd be softer with ourselves, wiser, more forgiving. After all, we've lived through decades of uncertainty, change, heartbreak, and healing. We've built families, careers, homes. We've lost people we never imagined living without. We've survived things younger versions of us would have sworn we couldn't. And yet, so many of us still speak to ourselves with a voice sharper than anyone else ever was. It's subtle but persistent. I should have done that differently. Why do I always mess things up? I'm so behind. I've wasted too much time. I'm too old now to fix it. We don't say these words out loud. Most people wouldn't even know we think this way. On the outside, we might smile, offer advice, crack jokes, but inside there's this quiet, relentless voice. One we've been living with so long we hardly notice how cruel it is anymore. But it's there. And the older we get, the louder it sometimes becomes, because aging, for all its beauty, comes with space. And in that space, the echoes return. One woman I spoke with, her name was June, 66 years old, told me that some mornings, the hardest thing she does isn't getting out of bed, or taking care of her arthritis, or facing a lonely day. It's stopping herself from replaying moments from 30 years ago. The moment she walked out of a marriage she still questions. The years she was too busy to notice her daughter needed her. The things she didn't say to her parents before they passed. She said, "I've made peace with life being short, but I still struggle to make peace with myself." And that is something I hear more often than most people imagine. Buddhism offers us a gentle but radical invitation to become aware of our inner speech, not just our thoughts, but the tone we carry inside. The Buddha's teaching on right speech wasn't only about how we speak to others, it was about the entire ecosystem of language, especially the words we use when no one else is listening. Because here's the truth. The words we speak inside become the world we live in. And if the voice inside is always criticizing, always shaming, always whispering that you're not enough, then even the most peaceful home or beautiful sunset will feel distant, dulled by the storm of self-judgment. But if the voice inside becomes kinder, softer, more honest and loving, then even an ordinary morning can feel like sanctuary. The journey of Buddhist aging is not just about letting go of the world outside. It's about transforming the relationship with the world inside. Imagine for a moment that you could meet your inner voice in person. What would they look like? What age would they be? Would you trust them to guide you through hard times? Would they hold your hand or shake their head at you? Most of us discover, when we slow down and really listen, that our inner voice is outdated, shaped by fears from long ago, by parents who couldn't give what we needed, by teachers who taught with shame, by a culture that measured us by youth and at speed. But now we are older, and we get to choose again. I want to tell you a simple story. It's not dramatic, but it changed someone's life. There was a man named Raymond, 71 years old, widowed, retired from working in shipping and logistics. He came to a local Dharma circle I was teaching at a community center in Ohio. Quiet man, soft-spoken. At first, he barely spoke. One evening, after a session on loving-kindness meditation, he came up and asked if it was weird that it felt fake to send kind wishes to himself. "I'm not a monster," he said, "but I just never thought about being kind to me. It's always been Do better. Fix it. Keep moving, I said. What if your compassion's been misdirected your whole life? What if the part of you that pushes so hard is just trying to protect a younger version of you that's still scared? He paused, and after a moment he said quietly, I think I've been mad at myself since I was 23. Raymond started practicing loving kindness every morning. Just 5 minutes, one hand on his heart, simple phrases. May I be kind to myself. May I forgive myself. May I feel safe inside. A year later, he emailed me. The subject line just said, I can breathe now. This isn't magic. It's mindfulness. It's presence. And it works because it's built on something real. Your own intention to no longer abandon yourself. You've been through so much already. You've likely forgiven others who've hurt you far worse than you've ever hurt yourself. Isn't it time to bring some of that compassion home? So how do we begin? Not with grand resolutions, not with fake positivity, not with pretending nothing hurts. We begin by listening. That's all. Just listen to the voice in your head for a day. Notice when it snaps, when it sighs, when it whispers. You should avenge. Don't argue with it. Just pause and ask gently, would I say this to someone I love? If not, then it doesn't belong in you either. Start small. You can write down the negative thoughts when they come. Then, next to each one, write a kinder version. I'm so behind, it comes. I'm still growing and I'm not done yet. I ruined everything becomes. I made mistakes, but I also kept going. Then speak those kinder words out loud, even if you don't fully believe them yet, because healing doesn't start with belief. It starts with willingness. You can also try short practice, adapted from Buddhist metta-meditation. Sit quietly. Place a hand over your chest or belly. Close your eyes. Say slowly, inwardly or aloud, may I be safe. May I be kind to myself. May I forgive myself. May I be at ease. At first it might feel strange, foreign, even silly, but give it time. Remember, you've practiced self-criticism for decades. You've repeated it until it became second nature. This is just new. When your heart already knows the words to, even if your mind doesn't yet. And as you go through your day, notice the little victories. The moments you were patient. The moments you made space for rest. The moments you chose not to judge yourself for forgetting a name or skipping a task. Write them down, not for anyone else to see, but to remind yourself, I am growing. Still, even now, the world may not always see your progress. The people around you may still expect the old version of you, but you will know, you'll feel. And one day, maybe not too far from now, you'll hear the voice in your head say something different after you make a mistake. Not, you idiot, but it's okay. You're learning. Let's try again. And in that moment, you'll know. You've become your own refuge. The Buddha never asked us to be perfect. He only asked us to be awake. And to be awake, you must be present. And to be present, you must feel safe inside your own heart. So speak to yourself gently, especially now. You've lived through enough storms. Let your inner voice finally become a place of shelter. There comes a moment, quietly usually, when the body begins to feel unfamiliar. It's not always dramatic. It doesn't arrive with alarms. More often it shows up as a subtle, unshakable noticing. You don't get up from chairs the same way anymore. You don't sleep as deeply as you once did. You move slower, not by choice, but by necessity. And some mornings, you wake up feeling like your body has aged 5 years overnight, even though nothing obvious has happened. After 60, these sensations become more frequent, and if you're like many people, a thought begins to form, quietly but sharply. My body is betraying me. It's a painful thought, one that carries sadness, frustration, sometimes even shame. You used to carry bags, grandkids, groceries, your whole world. You used to dance. You used to sleep without waking 5 times a night. You used to trust your knees, your balance, your energy. Now, you plan your day around what won't hurt. You think twice before climbing stairs. You notice every new ache as a reminder of what's gone. But Buddhism invites us to see things not with the eyes of judgment, but with the eyes of wisdom. And through that lens, a different truth appears. Your body is not betraying you. It's just being honest. It's not punishing you. It's not failing you. It's simply speaking more clearly than it used to. The problem isn't that the body has changed. The problem is that we never really learned how to listen to it. In Buddhist practice, the body is not an obstacle. It is not something to control, escape, or override. It is the first ground of mindfulness, the first foundation. It is the place where awakening begins, not in some distant realm, not after we die, but right here, in this breathing, aching, miraculous body. This is the last home we get in this lifetime, the final temple. And we forget that too easily. We spend years building homes, decorating them, fixing them. We repaint walls, replace floors, mow lawn. We treat the houses we live in with care, but neglect the temple we live as, until the body slows us down, until it demands to be acknowledged. And that demand, as uncomfortable as it is not cruelty. It is invitation. I once sat with a man named Thomas, age 72, a retired firefighter. He told me, I used to lift people out of buildings. Now, I can't lift a bag of soil without hurting for 3 days. He said it like a joke, but his eyes betrayed him. There was grief in them. I asked him, when was the last time you thanked your body for what it's carried? He blinked, surprised. I never have. So I invited him to close his eyes and imagine his body, not as a thing, but as a friend, not as an enemy, not as a machine, but as a lifelong companion. What would you say to that friend? I asked. He was silent for a long time. Then softly he said, I'm sorry. I never treated you like someone sacred, but you kept showing up for me anyway. That's the thing about the body. It shows up again and again. Through heartbreak, loss, exhaustion, stress, injury, it stays. It holds, it carries, it holds. It carries. Yes, it forgets. Yes, it slows. But that is not betrayal. That is truth. And truth, even when it hurts, is the beginning of freedom. The Buddha taught that mindfulness of the body is the first step toward liberation. Before watching your thoughts, before examining your emotions, you return to the breath, the posture. It's where joy lives, it's where you suffer, and it's where you wake up. So how do we honor this temple, especially as it ages? Not with guilt, not with punishment, not with the old harsh ideas of pushing through it, or no pain, no gain, no gain. We begin with care, real care, Buddhist care, care that listens, care that respects. Eat mindfully, not obsessively, not to control, but to nourish, instead of, I shouldn't eat this, try. What does my body need today? How will this make me feel tomorrow? What can I eat that brings me warmth, comfort, and clarity? Eat like you're feeding someone precious, because you are. Rest without guilt. You are not lazy for needing rest. You are alive, and living things need recovery. The Buddha encouraged monks to rest often, to sleep when tired, to sit when weary, to move when the body called. Rest is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you are listening. And listening is the first act of love. Walk slowly, don't rush. You don't have to be anywhere fast anymore. Walk like the earth is sacred. Walk like your breath matters. Walk like your breath matters. Walk like your body is your teacher, not your burden. In Zen Buddhism, walking meditation is a holy practice. Each step is a prayer. Each footfall is a return. Let your walk become your healing. Breathe with your whole body. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your body is nothing at all, except to breathe with it. Find 5 minutes a day. Sit quietly. Put one hand over your chest, one over your belly. Close your eyes. Inhale slowly. Exhale even slower. Say silently, "Thank you for staying." And listen. Just listen. Your body will speak, not in words, but in feelings, in pulses, in warmth, in release. And most importantly, let go of who you used to be. That body was beautiful. That energy was amazing. But it's not your job to match your former self. It's your job to love the self who is here now. To protect the version of you who has made it this far. To honor the wrinkles, the softness, the weight, the slowness, not as flaws, but as symbols of a life lived with courage. Stop asking your body to perform like it did at 35. Start asking it what it needs at 65, or 75, or 83. The answers will surprise you. They will be gentler, quieter, more honest, and they will bring you home to yourself. In the end, your body isn't asking to be young again. It's asking to be loved, to be trusted, to be seen as sacred. You are not a machine wearing out. You are a temple that time has carved into beauty. A place where spirit still dances. A sanctuary for stillness, wisdom, and awakening. So care for it, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but because this is where peace begins, not after the body, in the body, right here, right now, with you. There's something oddly relentless about the way we carry goals in this world. They begin early. Even before we understand what a goal is. As children, we're told to be good, to succeed, to grow up and make something of ourselves. By the time we reach adulthood, the messages are louder. Do more, Earn more, improve constantly, chase your potential like it's running ahead of you, always just out of reach. And for many, that chase doesn't stop. Not even after retirement. It's subtle but persistent. Even when the kids are grown, the house is paid off, the to-do list has shortened, there's still this voice whispering, "What's next? What haven't you accomplished yet?" Some people make a new kind of checklist. Not one for work or chores, but for legacy. Write a memoir, take up painting, lose weight, start a YouTube channel, be more spiritual, become someone new. It looks inspiring on the surface, but underneath, for many, it's just another mask of pressure, another disguised form of never-enoughness. And slowly, quietly, the soul begins to feel it. Not the rush of energy that comes with fresh ambition, but the fatigue, the weariness, the aching question, "Why am I still running?" You see, there's a kind of heaviness that doesn't come from age itself. It comes from carrying expectations that no longer fit the person you are today. The truth is, as we age, our relationship to time changes. It's not endless anymore. It's precious. And precious time demands a different kind of goal. Not the kind that makes you race, but the kind that lets you rest into yourself. Buddhist teaching offers a beautiful middle path here. The Buddha didn't say, "Stop trying." He didn't say, "Let life pass you by." But he also didn't tell us to burn ourselves out with striving. What he gave us instead was balance, the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose, not overworking the mind, not indulging its laziness, not abandoning life, not gripping it so tightly it stops breathing. The middle way is the path of the wise, especially in the second half of life, because now it's not about winning, it's about waking up. And you don't wake up by running faster. You wake up by returning to what matters, gently, slowly, with compassion. Let me tell you about George. He's 69. Spent 40 years in the tech industry. Smart, precise, checklist man, through and through. He showed up to a mindfulness series I taught with a notepad full of goals, things to accomplish before 70. He wanted to learn piano, get in shape, write a legacy blog for his grandkids, read the entire PLE canon, start a meditation podcast, and rebuild his kitchen. All within a year, but halfway through our course, he confessed something. "I'm exhausted," he said, "and worse, I'm disappointed in myself for not being able to keep up. Even now, I can't let myself rest." I asked him something simple. "What's one thing this week that would bring your heart peace?" He paused for a long time and then said, "I'd like to sit under the tree in my backyard for 20 minutes. Just sit. No goals. Just be there." That was the moment something shifted in him. You see, we often confuse goals with growth. But not all goals are healthy. Some are echoes of an old self, the one that needed to prove, achieve, push. And in aging, that self begins to fall away. What's left behind is something more tender, more honest. The self that just wants to be free, free from pressure, free from regret, free to finally live with peace. And that's where attainable goals come in. Goals that match your current energy, your real needs, your true spirit. Not the goals from your 30s. Not the fantasy of your 40s, but the reality of now. So what does a Buddhist approach to goal setting look like after 60? It looks like compassionate simplicity. It looks like gentle intention. It looks like asking your soul what it truly needs and being brave enough to listen. Practice the 3 gentle goals each week. Set just 3 intentions. Not tasks, not obligations, but small, soul-nourishing invitations. Ask yourself, what would bring me peace this week? What needs my quiet attention? What energy do I actually have to give? Maybe one of your goals is to write a kind letter to yourself from 10 years ago, to take a slow walk by the lake without checking your phone, to light a candle each morning and sit in silence for 5 minutes, to call someone just to say, "I'm thinking of you," to cook something with love, not speed. These are not small things. These are the real things, the things that nourish your being instead of exhausting your spirit. And here's what's beautiful. When you live this way, something begins to shift. You start to realize that you don't have to become anything else. You don't have to keep reinventing yourself. You are not an unfinished project. You are a living expression of practice. And your goals now, they can reflect that. Not to impress, but to express. Not to get ahead, but to go inward. One of the core illusions in aging is this idea: I've run out of time, so I must use what's left as efficiently as possible. But in Buddhist time, the only moment that exists is this one, now. And if no is lived fully, not efficiently, but authentically, then time is never wasted. In fact, it expands. You'll feel it when you sit under a tree for no reason. When you hold your own hand and whisper, "I'm enough, even now." When your goals are no longer loud but wise, no longer urgent but honest. Here's what I invite you to try this week. 1. Write down 3 gentle intentions. Let one be about peace, one about presence, one about connection. 2. Cross out any goal that comes from fear. If the goal says, catch up, prove yourself, or undo the past, let it go. 3. Reflect on your energy, not your memory. You are not who you used to be. And that's a blessing. Set goals that match who you are becoming, not who you were. 4. Celebrate what you do accomplish, even if no one sees it. Watering your plants, saying no to a thought, taking a deep breath before reacting. These are victories. And if you forget all of this, just remember this: goals are not ladders to climb anymore. They're lanterns to hold, just enough light to see the next few steps in peace. The final chapters of life are not a race to a finish line. They're a return to what has always been enough. Your breath, your attention, your kindness, your presence. So set your goals with tenderness. Let them heal, not hurry. Let them guide, not grind. Let them feel like home, because that's what this season of life is for. Not striving, but arriving. There's a quiet lie that settles into many hearts after a certain age. The idea that life is already over, not physically, not officially, but silently. Like a book that's been closed before the final chapter was written. It sounds like this: there's nothing new left for me. I've done what I came here to do. My best years are behind me. This is just coasting now, just waiting for the end. It's not that people say this out loud. Most don't. But you see it in the way their eyes stop searching. You hear it in the same old stories being told again and again, not because they matter, but because nothing new has happened in a long time. You feel it in the way someone stops rearranging the furniture, stops learning songs, stops changing their walk, their meal, their mind. They don't call it giving up. They call it settling in. But underneath that settling, something is starving, something called aliveness. Many older adults, not all, but many, slowly accept a shrinking world. They stop exploring because they believe they've seen what needs to be seen. They stop learning because they think wisdom has already arrived. They stop moving forward, not because they're content, but because they're afraid. Afraid of discomfort. Afraid of being foolish. Afraid of starting over. Afraid of failing. Publicly, privately, or just silently in the mirror. But Buddhism offers us a radical reminder. Impermanence is not an ending. It is constant invitation. Everything changes, not to take from us, but to open us. Not to punish us, but to invite us again into the living moment, this right now. This body, this breath, this age, this moment is not too late. It is not too small. It is not too far gone. It is alive. And it is waiting for you to come alive inside it again. There's an old plum tree in the courtyard of a monastery I once visited in Kyoto. Its bark is gnarled and cracked. It leans slightly from the wind of many winters. But every spring it still blooms, not as lushly as it did 40 years ago, but enough to remind every visitor that life refuses to be finished. One morning, a young monk swept petals under the tree and whispered, "Even the old ones remember how to blossom." I never forgot that. So the question becomes, if a tree still remembers, do you? Do you remember how to let something new move through you? A new song, a new conversation, a new road, a new idea. Do you remember what it feels like to try something, not because you're good at it, but because it makes your heart feel awake? The Buddha taught that life is impermanent, but he also taught that impermanence is what makes transformation possible, that nothing is fixed, not even you, not even now. Rebirth doesn't happen once at the end. It happens every morning, every breath, every time you say yes to the unknown. Let me tell you about Marjorie. She's 74, retired librarian, widowed twice. She told me, "I haven't had a first in years. I haven't done something new in almost a decade. I miss being curious." So I asked her, "What would you try if no one could see you fail?" She smiled shyly. "I've always wanted to paint." So she bought a tiny watercolor set and started with flowers. Badly, she says, but she kept going. One petal, one sunrise, one messy, joyful splash at a time. 2 months later, she said, "I didn't become an artist, but I did become someone who's not afraid to start." That's the real success. Trying new things at this stage of life isn't about reinvention for the world's approval. It's about expansion for the soul's survival. Because when we stop expanding, we start contracting, inward, smaller, until the days blur and the spirit dims. But when we open, even slightly, something returns. Wonder. And wonder, my friend, is not the territory of the young. It belongs to the awake. So how do we bring fresh air back into life? Not by uprooting everything, but by planting something tiny, something possible in the soil of now. Practice small doors to aliveness. 1. Try one new taste. Pick something from the market you've never cooked before. Not because it's trendy, because it's unfamiliar. You don't need to like it. You just need to meet it with presence. When you chew it slowly, you're not just eating. You're reminding your mind that newness is still possible. 2. Walk a new path. Literally, take a different street, a different park, a different aisle in the grocery store. Turn left where you usually turn right. Let your eyes notice things again. The shapes, the smells, the faces. Noticing is spiritual practice. It's the foundation of mindfulness, and nothing wakes up the mind faster than seeing the world from a new angle. 3. Pick up a new idea. Read a book that challenges your views. Ask someone younger about what they're learning. Watch a documentary about something you've never cared about, and care for 10 minutes. You don't need to agree. You just need to stretch even a little, because stagnation is the slow death of the human mind. And you were not born to go numb. You were born to move, to flex, to change. Even now, especially now. 4. Learn again, not to master, but to stay alive. Pick up the guitar. Try writing haiku. Say hello in a new language. Knit, sculpt, sing. It doesn't matter what. What matters is how, not with perfection, but with the joy of being a beginner again. Let yourself be awkward. Let yourself fumble. There's a kind of holy fire in fumbling, because it proves you're still playing. And here's the truth. The people who keep trying new things late in life don't do it because they're naturally brave. They do it because they've realized that comfort is not the same thing as peace. That habit is not the same thing as joy. That familiarity is not the same thing as being fully alive. So ask yourself, what is one new thing I can try this week just for me? What's one doorway I've never walked through? What's one question I've never asked? What's one version of myself I haven't met yet? Because they're still there, those versions of you. Still waiting, not in the past, but in what's next. You are not done. You are not too old. You are not behind. You are right on time for your next small awakening. And life, if you let it, will meet you there. With wind, with breath, with one green shoot, pushing up through old soil, just like still pruning, still try. There's a quiet shift that happens after a certain age. It doesn't arrive in a dramatic moment or a calendar milestone. It creeps in through the body first. The soreness in your back that lingers longer than it used to. The nights when sleep becomes a stranger. The way grief sits heavier in the chest and lighter joys take longer to reach you. And somewhere in that change, a thought sneaks in. Maybe it's all going downhill from here. It's subtle, almost reasonable. You don't say it out loud, but you start to believe that the best of life is behind you, that each pain is a sign of decline, that each loss marks a permanent subtraction, that suffering is now your new normal, and that the most you can hope for is to endure it with grace, This is where many begin to lose their light, not because they are weak, but because they mistake suffering for failure. But Buddhism tells a different story. The Buddha never promised a life without suffering. In fact, the very first truth he taught was that suffering is inevitable. Aging, illness, death, separation from what we love, the presence of what we don't. But what he did promise was something deeper. All things are preceded by the mind. All things are shaped by the mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never leaves. In other words, the mind doesn't remove suffering, but it can transform your relationship to it. And through that transformation, you rediscover peace. Let me say something clearly. Staying positive after 60 doesn't mean pretending everything is okay. It doesn't mean smiling through pain or denying reality. It means being honest and still choosing hope. It means looking suffering in the eye and saying, "You will not define me. You may stay, but you will not steal the light from my heart." It means remembering that every storm is also a doorway. There's a man named Ben, 73. He lost his partner of 41 years to cancer. Then a year later, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. His hands began to tremble. He couldn't write the way he used to. He stopped cooking, stopped gardening. Slowly, the world closed in around him. When I met him at a meditation group, he told me, "I feel like I'm disappearing." But over time, something shifted in him. It didn't happen all at once. He didn't find a miracle, but he started doing one thing differently. He started noticing what was still here. He began each morning by naming one thing he was grateful for. Not big things, little ones. The warmth of the mug in his hands, the birds at the feeder, the memory of a laugh he shared with his partner decades ago. And slowly his relationship with suffering softened. His tremors remained. His grief stayed. But so did his heart. It stayed open. And that is the point of Buddhist aging, not to avoid pain, but to walk through it with a steady mind and a compassionate heart. In Buddhism, the mind is compared to a garden. What you water grows. What you neglect withers. If you water fear, it grows. If you water bitterness, it takes over. But if you water gratitude, presence, clarity, the garden becomes a refuge. That's what positivity is. Not denial, but deliberate attention to what still gives you life. And there is always something. You can practice this, not in theory, not someday, but right now, quietly, gently, right here. Practice 1. Gratitude as a daily path each evening. Write down 3 things you're grateful for. Even if your body aches, even if you feel alone, even if the day was difficult, you don't need grand gestures, just honesty. I felt sunlight on my skin. I made it through today. The tea was warm. This isn't a trick. It's training. You are training your mind to see the good, not because suffering isn't real, but because the heart needs both shadow and light to stay whole. Practice 2. Watch your thoughts like clouds. Your mind will say many things. This is pointless. I'm useless. No one really cares. Don't argue. Don't resist. Just watch. Like clouds passing across a sky, you don't try to hold them. You don't have to believe them. You just say, "That's a thought, not the truth." This is mindfulness. And mindfulness is the light that reveals the path beneath the fog. Practice 3. Speak kindly to yourself when the pain comes, when the memory stings, when the sleep doesn't come. Say to yourself, I'm still here. I'm allowed to feel this. I will walk gently today. This is how you stay positive without bypassing the truth. You hold both, the hurt and the hope, and you let them live side by side like old friends. And maybe the most important practice 4, be a refuge for others. One of the most powerful ways to stay positive is to share light. Call someone and ask them how they are really. Send a letter to someone who is hurting. Smile, even if your heart is heavy. Not to fake it, but to offer a moment of rest to someone else. In Buddhism, the deepest joy comes from compassion in action. And the greatest positivity is the kind that reaches beyond yourself. So what do we do when the suffering won't go away? We stay. We breathe. We water the good. We move slowly with eyes open. We choose presence over panic, stillness over speed, curiosity over despair, and most of all, we choose to stay awake inside it. You don't need to be cheerful to be positive. You don't need to be strong to be resilient. You don't need to be pain-free to be peaceful. You just need to remember what the Buddha taught. The mind leads all things. And with the right mind, even suffering can become a place of deep refuge. So the next time you feel it, the heaviness, the doubt, the ache, pause, place a hand over your chest. Breathe in gently and say, I am still growing. I am still learning. Even now, especially now. There is light in me. Because the truth is, aging is not a descent. It is a deepening, and your soul still has room to grow. Let that be your path. Let that be your light. Let that be your quiet revolution. There's something peculiar that happens after retirement. You suddenly find yourself with time, great stretches of it, and yet you're not always sure how to live in it. You imagined it would feel like freedom, like space to finally enjoy life. But instead, the days blur together. The coffee gets brewed. The news comes on. The house sits quiet. Errands, emails, a little walking. Some days pass gently. Some feel hollow, but quietly. Beneath it all, a question starts to surface. When was the last time I really felt joy? Not comfort, not routine, but real joy, the kind that warms you from the inside out, the kind that makes you smile to yourself when no one's watching, the kind that doesn't come from productivity or being needed or achieving something, but simply from being alive in something you love. And for many people in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, that joy has gone quiet. In Buddhism, this state of quiet numbness is not ignored. It's named, seen, and it's met with compassion. Because when joy disappears, the soul begins to close, not in dramatic collapse, but like a window that's slowly forgotten how to open. But here's the truth. Joy is not gone. It's just waiting to be invited back in. There's a woman I know. Her name is Lillian, 68 years old, retired school teacher. When I met her, she told me, I have everything I need. I just don't feel anything anymore. She wasn't depressed. She wasn't in crisis. She was simply disconnected from joy. Her days were filled, but not full. I asked her, "What used to make you smile without effort?" She said, "I don't even know anymore. I haven't asked myself that in years." And that's where the forgetting begins. Not when we lose joy, but when we stop asking what joy is now, because it changes. Just like we do in your 20s. Maybe joy was adventure. In your 30s, accomplishment. In your 40s, family. But now, joy must become something quieter, deeper. Something sustainable. Not the joy of thrill, but the joy of presence. Not loud laughter at a party, but the still, soul-level smile that happens when your hands are in the soil, or a letter arrives in the mail, or you finish a book that feels like it understood your life better than you ever could. This is not lesser joy. This is mature joy. And it matters more than ever. Because joy, real, nourishing joy, is not indulgent. It's not childish. And it's not selfish. In Buddhism, joy is a wholesome root of the path. It's what allows the mind to soften, the breath to deepen, the heart to remain open, even when life hurts. Without joy, your spirit begins to dry up. With it, even suffering becomes lighter. So why do we so often deprioritize it? Part of it is cultural. We've been taught that joy must be earned, that it must be deserved through hard work, good behavior, or usefulness to others. But in the Dharma, joy is not transactional. It is spiritual maintenance. If compassion is water for the soul, joy is sunlight. You need both to keep blooming. So let's begin with something gentle. What makes you smile? Not what impresses people. Not what feels useful. Not what gets praise. Just what softens your shoulders. What brings warmth to your chest. What makes you lose track of time in the best way. Maybe it's making tea slowly. Maybe it's feeding birds and watching how they return. Maybe it's calling a friend and hearing their voice brighten when they say your name. Or maybe it's something you haven't done in years. Sketching, singing, dancing barefoot in the kitchen, writing poetry in the margins of old notebooks, sitting in the garden and noticing how the sky changes across an hour. These things do not accomplish anything. They don't move the needle, but they move you, and that is enough practice. 30 minutes of unnecessary joy. Here's the invitation. Every day, give yourself just 30 minutes to do something you love. No outcomes, no woes, no reason except being with joy. And be strict about this. Don't make it into a project. Don't post it. Don't schedule it for later. Just be with it. Let joy become your teacher again. Let it show you what your heart responds to without explanation. Lillian, the teacher I mentioned earlier, she took up writing handwritten letters. Each morning she picks someone from her life, past or present, and writes them a short, gentle note. She doesn't expect a reply. She just lets her love find its way to the page. She told me last month, "I think joy came back because I stopped chasing it. I just gave it a chair and waited." That's the thing about joy, is not a destination. It's a returning, a remembering, a warming of the body from within. And when you spend time with it, not in bursts, but in rhythm, it starts to change you. you become softer, less reactive, more open to mystery. You begin to wake up not to tasks, but to beauty, and slowly, something in you begins to smile before your lips do. Now let's clear a few myths. Myth #1, joy must be earned. Truth, joy must be chosen. Myth #2, joy means avoiding suffering. Truth, joy is how we survive suffering. Myth #3, you need a reason to justify joy. Truth, joy is the reason. So here is your sacred task. For the rest of this month, create a joy shelf, a small place where you put things that remind you of what you love. Books, photos, flowers, letters, candles. Keep a joy journal, not for deep reflections, just for tracking the things that make you smile. Say this to yourself every morning. My joy matters, not to the world, but to me. And that's enough. And when resistance comes, because it will, and the mind whispers, you should be doing something else, you don't deserve this, this is a waste of time, breathe. Smile gently and respond with the clarity of a wise elder. This is what keeps me alive. In the end, life may be short, but joy can be long. It can echo, it can stretch, it can linger in a teacup, a petal, a song. It can carry you through grief. It can soften you through change. It can make these final chapters feel more like arrival than ending. So today, not tomorrow, ask yourself, what brings me quiet joy? What have I forgotten to love? And can I give that love 1 hour of my life this week? No strings, no purpose, no rush? Because joy is not a luxury. It is a path. And when walked slowly, it leads you home. Would you like me to now proceed to Truth 7? Practice gratitude, because those who adjure there's a silence that follows loss. Not the kind that screams in grief or floods in tears, but the slow, quiet kind. It creeps in after the funeral guests have gone home, after the job no longer needs you, after the children have grown and the calendar stretches blank. It's a silence made of space, of what's been taken, of what's no longer coming back. And inside that space a question forms, what's left? This is the ache of aging that no one warns you about. Not the body slowing down, not the face changing in the mirror, but the inner shift when the world becomes quieter and you must decide whether to meet it with despair or devotion. For many people, aging becomes a list of what's been lost. They speak in the past tense. I used to travel. I used to be needed. I used to feel alive. Each memory is a door that feels closed, and behind it joy feels like something that belonged to someone else, a younger, faster, more wanted version of you. But the Buddha taught us something remarkable. Let us rise up and be thankful. For if we didn't learn a lot today, at least we learned a little. And if we didn't learn a little, at least we didn't get sick. And if we did get sick, at least we didn't die. So let us all be thankful. This isn't naive. It is not forced optimism. It's the wisdom of the awakened heart, a heart that knows life is never about having everything. It's about noticing what remains. Gratitude is not a personality trait. It's a practice. It's not what you feel when everything is perfect. It's what you return to when everything is uncertain. It's how you stay rooted when life begins to shake. It's how you remain whole when the outer things begin to fall away. I once sat with a woman named Diane, 76 years old. She had survived breast cancer, buried her husband, and lived in a small apartment filled with books and quiet. One afternoon, she told me, "I've lost more than I ever thought I could. But I'm not broken. I've just become quieter." I asked her how she stayed grounded. She opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of worn index cards. On each one, a handwritten note. "The sound of rain this morning. A neighbor who helped carry my groceries. A memory of dancing barefoot in the kitchen. The smell of my mother's old scarf. These are my anchors," she said. "When I forget what's still good, I come back to these." Gratitude doesn't erase pain. It doesn't pretend loss didn't happen. It simply widens the lens, so the pain isn't all that's there. Because when you practice gratitude, something shifts. Not the world, but your relationship to it. You begin to see that what's left is enough, not because it fills every hole, but because it shines light around the edges. And in that light, the heart breathes again. In Buddhist aging, this is a sacred turning point. You stop measuring life by what you achieve or what you accumulate. You start measuring it by what you can appreciate. And appreciation isn't passive. It's not a polite thank you. It's a way of being, a daily devotion to noticing the miracle of the ordinary. Let me offer you this practice. The evening gratitude ritual each night before bed. Take a moment to reflect, not on what went wrong, not on what still hurts, but on what was quietly beautiful. Even if the day was dull, heavy, lonely. Ask, did someone smile at you today? Did your breath come easy for even a moment? Did the sunlight fall through the window in a way that stopped you? Write it down. 3 things. Every night, over time, you will build something that no money can buy, a map of joy that carried you through the dark. And when the mind resists, as it always does, when it says, "There's nothing good here," remind it. The eyes that see suffering can also see beauty. The heart that breaks can also bow. You are not here to ignore pain. You are not here to ignore pain, but you are here to widen your attention, to refuse to let pain blind you to everything else that is still alive in you. There's a Buddhist parable that says, a man once carried a heavy sack of suffering on his back. He walked for miles, bent over. Finally, he sat under a tree and looked around. He noticed birdsong, the way the breeze touched his face, the softness of the earth beneath him. He wept, not from pain, but from the realization that even suffering had not taken everything from him. And in that moment, the sack felt lighter. That is gratitude. It is the rediscovery of what pain tried to make you forget. There is still something good, and it lives in this moment. So, let me ask you gently, what are you still able to hold? What quiet joys still visit your morning tea? What softness still waits in your bed each night? What memories come not to hurt but to warm? Write them down. Speak them aloud. Offer them like incense on the altar of this life. Because this noticing is how you age with grace. And the more you practice, the more the world responds. Colors become richer. Voices become sweeter. Even silence begins to hum with presence, because what you water grows. And if you water gratitude, you will find that your spirit becomes a garden that stays alive through every season. In the end, Buddhist gratitude is not about pretending life is easy. It's about remembering that even in hardship, the sacred is still near. It lives in breath, in small gestures, in a slice of orange, in a letter from a friend, in a single line of a poem that feels like it was written just for you. And if you can hold these things, even lightly, you will never be empty. So the next time you feel like life has taken too much, sit still, place a hand on your heart, and ask, what is still here? The answer will surprise you, because gratitude, my friend, is not just a way to look at the world. It's a way to come home to it. And those who age with gratitude, they may grow older, but they are never without light, because they are held, not by what they've kept, but by what they've learned to love more deeply, even now, especially now.